We are two frustrated optimists. The title of the opening chapter of this book is, If You See Something, Say Something. You know where that's from. That's actually the mantra of the Department of Homeland Security. It plays over and over on loudspeakers in airports and bus stations and railroad stations around our country, where we have seen and heard something, and millions of Americans have too. What we've seen is not a suspicious package left under a stairwell. What we've seen is hiding in plain sight. We have seen something that poses a greater threat to our national security and well-being than anything Al-Qaeda does. We've seen a country with enormous potential falling into the worst sort of decline, a slow decline. Just slow enough for us not to drop everything and pull together to fix what needs fixing. This book is our way of saying something about what is wrong, why things have gone wrong, what we can and must do to make them right. That is what this book is about. Now, what we basically argue is that America today faces three great challenges. The first you're very familiar with. It's the challenge of debt, deficit, entitlements, how we get our fiscal house back in order. Not going to talk about that tonight. Second is energy and climate, how we power our future as a country, but do it in a way that doesn't tip our planet into disruptive climate change. Maybe we'll talk about that a little in the Q&A. I want to talk tonight about the third great challenge we face. And that's how we as a country respond to what we believe is the biggest thing happening in the world today. And that is the merger of globalization and the information technology revolution. What we argue in this book is that the merger of globalization and IT, more IT leading to more globalization leading to more IT, is in fact the biggest thing happening on the planet today, affecting more other things. Basically, what has happened in the last 10 years is that the world has gone from connected to hyper-connected. And it is changing everything. But this move has been disguised and obfuscated by the subprime crisis and post 9/11. Now, as Thane said, I know a little bit about this because back in 2004, I wrote a book called The World is Flat, saying the world's getting connected. When I sat down to write this book with Michael, the first thing I did was get the first edition of The World is Flat off my bookshelf. Cracked it open to the index, looked under A, B, C, D, E, F, F, A, Facebook wasn't in it. When I was out there writing, the world is flat. We're all connected. Facebook didn't exist. Twitter was still a sound. The cloud was still in the sky. 4G was a parking place. LinkedIn was a prison. Applications were what you sent to college. And for most people, Skype was a typo. I love doing that. Can I do that again? Okay. All of that happened after I wrote The World is Flat. And what that tells me is that we've actually gone from a connected world to a hyper-connected world. And that is changing everything. For instance, when I wrote The World is Flat, I said we'd connected Boston and Bangalore, India's outsourcing capital. We've now actually connected Boston, Bangalore, and Surrey. Where's Surrey? That's a town 90 miles to the interior with 90,000 people, all of whom now, or many of whom, have these web-enabled cell phones and are on the grid with your kids and mine. When I wrote The World is Flat, I said we'd connected Detroit and Damascus in Syria. We've now connected Detroit, Damascus, and Dara. Say, where's Dara? Dara is the small Syrian border town where the Syrian revolution began, which, thanks to these web-enabled cell phones with cameras and flip cams and the internet, wireless, Syrians have been broadcasting pictures and stories of their revolution, despite the fact that the Syrian government has banned every international news organization from Syria. We are watching the Syrian revolution live, despite the fact that their government has banned that, because Syrian revolutionaries have basically created their own YouTube station called SNN, Sham News Network, where they dump all this video in, and news organizations around the world share it and use it. The 15 people in the front row here have in their wallets right now enough money to start Sham News Network. That's not connected. That's hyper-connected. When I travel, I love to look for small items in the newspaper. You always find strange things, interesting things. In October 2010, I was in New Delhi reading the Hindustan Times, and there was a small item on the front page that really caught my eye. It said that a Nepali telecommunications firm had just started providing third-generation mobile network service, 3G, at the summit of Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain. The story said this would allow thousands of climbers and trekkers who throng the region every year access to high-speed internet and video calls using their mobile phones. Do you know how many phone calls are now being made from the top of Mount Everest that begin, "Mom, you'll never guess where I'm calling you from"? That's a hyper-connected world. Here's also a hyper-connected world. I'm from Minnesota. My wife's from Iowa. Iowa's got a great liberal arts college, a lot like Gonzaga, Grinnell College, Central Iowa. Wonderful school. My mother-in-law went there. Later became chairman of the board. Great school. About 1,600 students. Great school, Grinnell. Last year, almost 10% of applications to Grinnell College came from China. Of those 10%, 43% had perfect 800s on their math SATs. You want your kid to go to Grinnell? When I got my BA from Brandeis. I think we had one exchange student, Zhao. He taught us all how to eat with chopsticks, Get that out of your mind. You got your kids to go to Grinnell, they will be competing against 250 applications from China last year, 43% of which had perfect 800s on their math SATs. That's also the hyper-connected world. Now, what's going on? Basically, when the world gets this hyper-connected, what it means is that if the whole world were a single math class at Gonzaga, the whole global curve just rose. The whole global curve just rose because every boss has cheaper, easier, faster access to above-average software, above-average automation, above-average robotics, above-average cheap labor, and above-average cheap genius in a hyper-connected world. Cheap genius. We've had to deal with a lot of cheap labor. The new challenge is cheap genius. And what this means is, to us, the single most important socioeconomic fact of our time, which is that average is over. Average is officially over in a hyper-connected world. That old saying in Texas, if all you ever do is all you've ever done, all you ever get is all you ever got, that is officially N.A. no longer applicable. If all you ever do is all you've ever done, all you'll ever get now is not all you ever got. You will get less. Woody Allen's dictum, 90% of life is just showing up, also N.A. You just show up for your job today, you will not earn an average wage to lead to an average lifestyle. Average is officially over We all now need to find our extra, that unique value contribution we can make that will differentiate us. And we need to find it every day. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, very easy for you to say, Mr. Smartypants, New York Times columnist. I know what you're thinking. No, let me tell you about my job. I became the foreign affairs columnist of the New York Times in January 1995, and I inherited James Reston's office in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. What a thrill and honor to inherit the office of this great editor and columnist of the 60s and 70s of the New York Times. Now, I suspect Mr. Reston used to come to the office back in the 60s and 70s and say to himself every morning, I wonder what my 7 competitors are going to write today. And he personally knew all 7. Walter Lippmann, Stuart Alsop, Joe Kraft, Mary McGrory, Tony Lewis. I do the same thing. I come to the office every morning and I say, I wonder what my 70 million competitors are going to write today. I have 70 million competitors. I'll tell you a story. I was in India a year ago, October, and I went down to IIT Jodhpur, one of their MITs in Jodhpur, and I went there because the president there invited me to come down. They had invented a $39 iPad. And by the way, one of the features of the hyper-connected world will be radical breaking of price points, where things don't just go from $400 to $350 to $300. They go from $400 to $39.95, with people using the cloud and all kinds of new open source tools. Now, this has nothing to compare with the Apple iPad. It's a simple device, but a simple learning tablet, which they hope to use in schools all over India, that if you made a contribution of 100 rupees a month, you could afford. It was quite an interesting device. I was very impressed, and I came home and wrote my Sunday column about it. My Sunday New York Times column moves onto the internet at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometime between 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 8 a.m. in the morning, when you might have read it here in Spokane, someone in India went into the comment section under my column online and posted a laboratory stress test of the device I was writing about. Now, if you don't think that keeps me on my toes, okay, the fact that before you even read the column, someone in India had posted a lab stress test of the device I was writing about, which, thank God, backed up my column. Okay. I mean, I have to tell you, when I was in Beirut in the summer of 1982, I could write whatever I wanted about Yasser Arafat. Believe me. In the odd chance that somebody got a long-distance phone call from New York to Beirut through to Arafat and said, did you see what Friedman wrote about you? Who? Friedman? No, Friedman. Who does he work for? The New York Times? The New York Post? No, the New York Times. It took 6 weeks for the physical New York Times to get to Beirut by ship. Now you write a column from India, and before your readers have read it, somebody's already got the lab results out. That's what's going on in my world. And it's actually going on in everyone's world and forcing me to always be thinking about and looking for my extra. It's why I tell my girls, I'm an old fuddy-duddy. I was lucky. When I graduated college, I got to find a job. You will have to invent a job. That's the big change between us and our kids. I got to find a job. They will have to invent one. Oh, it may not be their first job. They may get lucky. My daughter, one went into teaching, one went into journalism. They got a first job. But if they want to keep that job, they're going to have to invent, reinvent, and re-engineer that job as they do it. Constantly proving their own unique value contribution. The old days where you graduate from Gonzaga, show up and say, I'm here, train me. Now, those days are over. We all have to find our extra. And you know where you learn this? If you just talk to employers today. So we have a chapter in the book called Help Wanted. We interviewed 4 generic employers. High-end white collar, the head of the national law firm in Washington, D.C., a national law firm in Washington, D.C., Nixon Peabody. A low-end white collar, the head of the outsourcing firm in India where we actually started The World is Flat. Blue collar, DuPont, Alan Cullman. And the world's biggest green-collar firm, the United States Army. And what's really interesting when you sit down and talk to employers and say, who are you looking for today? What was so interesting is even though these were 4 totally different industries, they all were looking for the same employee. What were they looking for? They were looking for people who could do critical reasoning and problem solving, ... in order to get an interview. Yeah, critical reasoning and problem solving, that's table stakes now. They assume you can do that. They assume that was part of your Gonzaga degree. What they really want to know is can you invent, reinvent, and re-engineer your job while you're doing it? Because in a hyper-connected world, the pace of change is so fast in every job. The big boss up there, he or she can't possibly be keeping up with it. Therefore, they need employees who, as Ellen Kullman said to us, employees who are always present, who are always thinking about how this job can be improved, engineered, and re-engineered. I'll give you a couple of examples. The head of that Washington law firm is a young man, not a young man, my age. That's sort of young. Named Jeff Lesk. He happens to be a family friend. And we were having dinner, 2008, height of the subprime crisis. Lehman Brothers had just melted down. And at dinner, I said to Jeff, what's happening to your law firm? And he said, oh, Tom, business is off. I said, what are you doing? He said, we're laying people off. I said, well, that's interesting. At a law firm, who gets laid off first? Because you're a partnership. Is it last in, first out? And he said, it was, but not anymore. He said, what's happening now is that those lawyers who did, routine work, lawyer is considered a non-routine skill. We all want to be non-routine. All want to be a journalist, an artist, a singer, an engineer, designer, teacher. Non-routine work is work that cannot be described by an algorithm and therefore easily automated, outsourced, and digitized. You all want your kids to be doing non-routine work. Middle level is routine work. That's work that is repetitive, can be described by an algorithm, can be easily outsourced, automated, and digitized in a hyper-connected world. And of course, the last category is non-routine local work. That's work that has to be done face-to-face. A butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, a nurse, a massage therapist, and your divorce lawyer. All things that have to be done in a specific location face-to-face. We all want to be doing non-routine work. But here's what's new. Just doing non-routine work is not enough anymore. You've got to be creative, non-routine. I got to be a creative journalist now. I can't just be a columnist. You need to be a creative lawyer. You can't just be a non-routine lawyer. You need to be a creative accountant. Well, not a creative accountant, but you know what I mean, all right? We got enough of those. We all have to find that extra, even if we're doing non-routine work. So back to Jeff. I said, what's happening with your lawyers? Well, he said, those lawyers who, when we, in the bubble, we had a pile of work, and we gave it to them, and they did it in a routine, non-routine way, some of them are gone. The ones we're keeping are those who came to us and said, Jeff, we could do this old work in a new, more efficient, and effective way. Or we could do new work in a totally new way. Those are the ones we're keeping. His interview in the book ends with him announcing that his law firm just hired a chief innovation officer. How many law firms do you know with a chief innovation officer? I guarantee you in 10 years, every law firm will have a chief innovation officer. That will be part of the work. Really interesting is the guy who heads that green-collar firm, the U.S. Army. His name is General Martin Dempsey. Now, you may have heard of him because he's now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but what was interesting is when we interviewed General Dempsey, he was actually head of the U.S. Army Education Corps. That's why I went to see him. But even more interesting is General Dempsey became a famous figure in the military because in 2003, General Martin Dempsey commanded the first ID that took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein in 2003. 5 years later, he found himself as the commander of CENTCOM, our overall Middle East command. And he tells this story in the book. In that job, 5 years later, he went to Afghanistan and visited a far-flung base near the Hindu Kush, commanded by a U.S. Army captain. He spent 2 hours with that captain and walked out and realized that that captain, out there in the Hindu Kush, had access to more firepower and more intelligence at both the national and tactical level than he, General Martin Dempsey, had when he commanded the troops that took Baghdad 5 years earlier. That's how much had changed in a hyper-connected world. So he came home, when he took over the U.S. Army Education Corps, completely revamped it. One of the things he did was a program that gave new recruits iPhones as soon as they arrived at boot camp. You were told that in 3 weeks, download the lesson, you're going to teach the course, and the drill instructor is going to sit in the front row. Because when a captain that far flung has access to that much power, how we recruit that captain, how we train that captain, how we promote that captain has to fundamentally change. And how that captain finds his or her extra becomes a real challenge for the U.S. military. Now, I know something else you're thinking. Hey, we all can't be Steve Jobs, Friedman. We all aren't going to invent iPods. That's true. That's very true. And that's why everyone can find their extra in different ways. My mom was in a nursing home for 10 years with Alzheimer's. What I would pay, and did sometimes, that the one nurse who looked after my mom put a smile on her face, because that nurse didn't just show up. She came with her extra every day. Oh, what I'd pay for that. What would you pay for going into the wine store and have the person at the counter not just ring you up, but say, I've just become an expert on Washington State wines. Maybe I can help you. There's a lot of ways to find your extra. A lot of them will be interpersonal and face-to-face. We all can't be and can't be expected to be Steve Jobs. But we all can think about how we don't just show up every day, but bring something truly extra to whatever it is we do. Because this process of hyperconnectivity is inexorable. It is marching on. You've heard the joke that the modern factory of the future is just two people, a man and a dog. The man is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to keep the man away from the machines. It isn't that bad, but it's going in that direction. So what do you tell your kids? That's a question I get all the time. What do you tell your kids? Well, I tell my kids 4 things. And they're so tired of hearing me say this. You want to thrive in the hyper-connected world? Think like an immigrant. Think like an artisan. Think like a starter-upper. And think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House in Minneapolis, just off Highway 100. What do I mean? First of all, think like an immigrant. How does the new immigrant think? New immigrant thinks, I just showed up here in Spokane. I don't know a soul, and there's no legacy spot waiting for me at Gonzaga University. I better figure out what's going on in this town and pursue those opportunities with more vigor and focus than anybody else. That's how the new immigrant thinks. New immigrants, Armenian friend of mine taught me this. New immigrants are paranoid optimists. They are optimists because they picked up from somewhere and went somewhere else for a better life, and they are paranoid that every day it will be taken away from them. Think like a new immigrant every day, because, friends, we're all actually new immigrants to this hyper-connected world. Second, think like an artisan. Who is the artisan? This is an idea of Larry Katz at Harvard. The artisan was that person in the Middle Ages who made every item individually. Every item one off, every saddle, every piece of furniture, every pair of shoes, every item of clothing, every utensil. The artisan made each one individually. And what did the best artisans do? They took such pride in their work, they carved their initials into it at the end of the day. Do your job every day as if you wanted to carve your initials into it at the end of the day. Think like an artisan. Third, think like a starter-upper. Got this idea from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. Reid always likes to say, in Silicon Valley, there's only one four-letter word. It's not the one you're thinking of, but it does start with an F. And that word is finished. If you ever think you've arrived and you're finished in Silicon Valley, you are soon to be finished. Everyone should always try to be in permanent beta. What is beta? Beta is that stage in software development or technology development where a product's about 7/8, 9/10 done, it's not quite done, and you throw it over the wall into the market, and the market deals with it, and they fix it, and they find the holes, and they throw it back, and you throw it over the wall again. Always be in beta. Always be engineering, re-engineering, and redesigning yourself. There's a quote from Alvin Toffler, the sociologist and the futurist, which I really like. It's attributed to him. No one is even sure he said it, but it's an awfully good quote. And what Toffler says is that the new literacy today, the new literacy is not reading and writing. The new literacy is the ability to learn and relearn in a lifelong way. If you graduate from Gonzaga with the ability to relearn and learn for the rest of your life, you have the most valuable degree possible. That is the new literacy. Lastly, think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House in Minneapolis. When I was working on this book, I was having breakfast on a Sunday morning with my best friend Ken Greer at Perkins Pancake House off Highway 100, 7 a.m. I ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and scrambled eggs. Ken ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and fruit. After 15 minutes, the waitress came, put our plates down, and all she said to Ken was, "I gave you extra fruit." That's all she said. She got a 50% tip. Why? Because that waitress, God bless her, she didn't control much, but she controlled the fruit spoon. And that was her extra. What was that waitress doing? She was thinking entrepreneurially. She was thinking entrepreneurially in her own little way, in her own little universe. Always think entrepreneurially. So friends, in this hyper-connected world, think like an immigrant. Stay hungry. Think like an artisan. Take pride. Think like a starter-upper and always be in beta. And think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House and always be entrepreneurial. because we all now truly do live in Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, where all the men are strong, all the women are beautiful, and all the children need to be above average. Now, this poses a real educational challenge for us. We have two educational challenges today. We need to bring our bottom to our average so much faster because we have so many young people in disadvantaged neighborhoods that are below average. And if you are below average, say if you do not have a high school degree at a minimum, a high school degree that can get you into some form of post-secondary education without remediation, there is nothing for you down there. There is simply no livelihood that will sustain a decent living. We need to get our bottom to our average so much quicker, and that's a challenge of the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. But at the same time, we need to get our average up to the global heights so much faster, where you define your extra. And that's a challenge of the 3 C's: creativity, collaboration, and communication. The things that enable people to find their extra. That's the big educational challenge we have today. You've got it at Gonzaga. We've got it in Washington, D.C. I live in Washington, D.C. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, actually. Down the road is Baltimore. 50 years ago in Baltimore, who was the biggest employer? Bethlehem Steel Company. You could get a job at the steel plant at Bethlehem Steel. You could actually drop out of high school or just have a high school degree, join the steel union, get a job at Bethlehem Steel, actually earn a good wage, buy an average house with an average yard, have 2.2 average kids, an average dog, have an average career, retire with an average retirement, and live a good American life. The biggest employer in Baltimore today is Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. Bethlehem Steel is long gone. They don't let you cut the grass at Johns Hopkins without a BA. Well, they do, but you know what I mean. That is the challenge today. And of course, if we were having a real election, if we were actually having an election now, that's what we'd be talking about. What we'd be talking about is 4 numbers. The unemployment rate for people with 4-year college degrees in America today is 4.1%. The unemployment rate for people with 2 years is about 6%. The unemployment rate for people with just high school degrees is around 11%. And the unemployment rate for people who don't graduate high school is about 13.7%. Those 4 numbers are the jobs crisis in a nutshell. What does it tell you? It tells you that every job today, every good job that will lead to a good standard of living, requires more education. And to me, if we were having an election, that's what we'd be talking about. How we get every young person in America access to some form of post-secondary education, be it vocational school, technical school, 2-year community college, or 4-year college. That is, to me, the jobs crisis. It's the America crisis. It should be the center of our public debate today if we were having an election. We are having an election.